In this lesson, we'll take a look at how to draw feet with graphite pencils. A foot can be intimidating to draw because, of course, it's a piece of anatomy, and there's a lot of different wrinkles and curves that happen there. But what we're going to do is we're going to break the foot down into basic forms. Simply draw these basic forms and piece them together, and then you've got a nice framework to work from to create your drawing of a foot. The first form we're going to look for is a wedge shape, and this is the bulk of the foot. This is the center portion of the foot, and you can think of it almost as a ramp. It slants downward towards the front of the foot. Just think of this as a solid form. The next form we'll consider is the end of the foot, where the toes exist. You can think of this as a shape like you might find at the end of a shoe, logically. It's almost a partial cylinder. And then the heel of the foot is also a partial cylinder, and it rises quite a bit higher, but it meets the end of the top portion of our ramp. If we can just think about the foot in terms of these three basic forms, we can sketch out these three basic forms initially, no matter what position the foot is in. Then we can concentrate on the contour lines or the outlines. As I mentioned before, it doesn't matter what position the feet are in. We can still find these shapes. First, the wedge shape. Secondly, the shape that exists at the end of the feet, the toe section. And then thirdly, the heel. We don't have to go in this order either, but most of the time I like to start with the wedge shape in the middle. So let's put this into practice and draw a few feet. We'll start here by drawing the wedge shape that exists in the middle portion of the foot. Then we can add the shape that exists at the heel of the foot. Again, it's a partial cylinder that's flattened on the sides. Then we can draw the shape that exists where the toes are located. Before we start defining the contours, we can lightly erase these sketchy guidelines. Then we can go back and define the contour lines. But now as we draw these contour lines or outlines, we don't have to do any guesswork as to where they're located, since we're using our shapes or forms that we drew originally as a guide for the contour lines. We'll pay special attention to where the foot is making contact with the surface. In this case, the bottom portion of the heel should be flattened. As we draw our toes, we can use our sketchy guidelines as a guide here as well. Notice that the toes do not stick out a uniform distance away from our center wedge. Usually, the second toe is the longest. The toes then become smaller, making their way back to the wedge. We can then add a couple of contour lines for the ankle and the lower portion of the leg. Then it's time to start addressing the value. Value is the darkness or lightness of a color. And of course, most of the time we refer to this as shading. So we'll add a bit of shading to indicate the light source, and in the process we'll also indicate the form of the foot. Unfortunately, there isn't a formula for addressing the value on a subject, much less a foot. Instead, we'll pay close attention to the light source. In this case, we have dual light sources, one from the left and one from the right. In this case, this produces stronger shadows on the lower portion of the foot and where the foot bends up closer to the ankle. Once we have initial applications of graphite in place, we can then address the texture of the foot. In this case, I'll use a blending stump to work some of the graphite material into the tooth or texture of the paper. A kneaded eraser is also used to address the texture. Just like we use the blending stump to work the material into the surface, we'll also use the eraser to lift out areas of graphite. The combination of the blending stump and the kneaded eraser leads to a more representational appearance of skin texture. We can then revisit with our 2B graphite pencil, making some areas a bit darker in the process. In this case, we'll darken up the shadow where the foot meets the surface. We can also define the line a little bit further in areas as well. We want to be careful that our outline or contour line is not too strong in areas of highlight. We'll use the blending stump to soften the shadow underneath, and the graphite pencil to darken the shadows between the toes even further. Then it's back to the blending stump to smooth transitions of tone and value. We can continue working with the graphite pencil, the blending stump, and the kneaded eraser until we have arrived at a full range of tone and value. And now our first drawing of a foot is complete. Let's draw a second foot, again following the process that we outlined earlier. we'll start with the wedge shape. This time the foot is pointed downward. So our second shape, where the toes exist, will be flattened compared to the wedge shape. We'll draw this shape secondly. Then we'll draw the form for the heel of the foot. In this case, it's tilted slightly to the right. We can lift our guidelines using a kneaded eraser to make them a bit lighter. Then we can start to address the contour lines or the outlines. Here again, we have our forms in place, so all of the guesswork when it comes to contour lines is taken out. We can pay closer attention to the subtle curves and changes in direction that happen with this contour line. And then at the base of the foot, we can add the toes. We're paying close attention to the outlines and contours that happen in this region. And we can also notice the slight curve that happens as they connect to the wedge shape. Now, before adding any value, we'll add a few additional details. In this case, we can see the toenails. We'll add a few lines to indicate their location. There are a few strong wrinkles that happen at the bottom of the foot in this case, so we'll draw some stronger lines to indicate these wrinkles. With the contour lines in place, we can now shift our focus to developing the tone and value. Here again, we'll make graphite applications using the 2B pencil. We're aware of the form of the foot as we're making applications. In other words, the directional strokes that we make with the pencil should flow over the cross contours or the form of the foot. They shouldn't be applied haphazardly. Instead, we're thinking about the overall form of the foot as these marks are made. This is a slow and gradual process. It's always easy to make values darker if you need to, but it's much more difficult to go back and make values lighter if you accidentally make them too dark. We're paying special attention to the subtle changes in tone and value that happen on the foot. With the foot especially, there are areas where the value gets a little bit lighter and areas where the value just gets slightly darker. So it's important to pay special attention to your subject or your reference as you're adding the tone and value. Here again, we have two light sources, one originating from the right and one originating from the left. In this case, the light source from the right is much stronger than the one on the left. This is producing areas of darker value, predominantly on the left side of the foot. Once we have our initial applications of graphite in place, we can go back and blend the applications using a blending stump just as we did with our first foot. When using the blending stump, we're considering the blending stump as a mark-making tool. Therefore, the directional strokes that are made with the blending stump should mimic those that were made with the graphite pencil. They should flow in a similar direction as the graphite marks were made with the pencil, flowing over the form of the foot. In this case, we're addressing the lighter locations first and then going into the darker locations with the blending stump. The blending stump has a tendency to pick up some of the graphite, which can make some of the lighter areas a bit too dark. Once we've smoothed out some of the transitions of tone and value with the blending stump, we can revisit the foot with the kneaded eraser, lifting out areas of lighter value as we go. In the process, we're adding to the illusion of realistic skin texture. Of course, we'll go back and forth between the kneaded eraser and the blending stump as necessary. Occasionally, a blending stump will mute some of the contrast and value that's required to make a drawing look three-dimensional. Therefore, we'll go back with a sharpened 2B pencil and define some of the contour lines, mainly in the areas of darkest value. So in the areas where we have strong highlight, we'll leave those edges alone and only address the areas where the values and the shadows are the darkest. In the process, we're increasing the range of value and we're also increasing the contrast. This increased contrast not only makes the drawing pop a little bit more, but it also helps to define the edges and the boundaries of the foot. We'll add a few darker marks for a few wrinkles that happen at the heel of the foot, and then blend them in gently using the blending stump. We can also strengthen the area of cast shadow right underneath the toes where the foot is contacting the surface. We'll make a few last alterations with the blending stump, and now our second foot is complete. Now we've drawn two challenging angles of the feet, but what happens when you're looking at the feet directly? Well, the answer is we approach it the exact same way. The only exception is we won't be able to see all the forms that are present. We'll start with our wedge shape. This time we're looking at it from a frontal view, just as we're looking at the foot. We'll establish a couple of lines for the ankle and the lower portion of the leg. Then we can draw the form for where the toes are located. And since we're viewing the foot from a frontal view, this is going to be more of a rectangular shape. You can see here that I've got this rectangular shape slightly offset to the right. There's no need to draw the form for the heel since it's not visible from this angle. With our basic forms in place, we can go back and start establishing the contour lines. From this particular view, a lot of these lines are going to be a bit more angular. We can use our guide to draw the toes, again paying close attention to the contour lines in this location. And then using a kneaded eraser, we can lightly erase any guidelines that are left or any stray marks. We'll also add a few indications of the visible toenails. Now we're ready to start addressing the tone and value of our third foot using the graphite pencil. Here again, we'll consider the directional strokes that are made with the pencil, allowing them to flow over the form of the foot. And here again, we have two light sources that are affecting the value on the foot. One originating from the right side and a second one originating from the left side. The light source originating from the right is definitely dominating. This means the darker values are going to be found mainly on the left side of the foot. In most circumstances, when dealing with any form of anatomy, whether it be a face or in this case a foot, the areas that protrude are typically lighter in value because they pick up more light. This means the areas on either side of the leg and the foot will typically be slightly darker in value. We can see this on the left side of the foot very clearly, as the value gets darker as it recedes away from the viewer. Any area that protrudes out from either side also is going to be affected by this rule. For example, the ankle, as it sticks out on either side of the foot, picks up more light on the top, so the upper portion of the ankle is typically lighter in value, while the underside of the ankle is typically darker in value. And just as we have with our previous two drawings, we'll go back with the blending stump and the kneaded eraser, adjusting the tones and values on the surface. We can pull out areas of highlight with the kneaded eraser, and we can adjust transitions of value using the blending stump. Then we can go back with our sharpened 2B pencil and define the edges a bit further, increasing the contrast and the range of value in the process. We'll also add a bit of cast shadow underneath the foot. In this case, a little bit less of it is visible, but it still should be included. And after softening the shadow with the blending stump and defining the edge a bit further with the 2B pencil, our third drawing of a foot is now complete. If you enjoyed this video, then subscribe to the channel. And if you're ready to learn even more about drawing and painting, then check out our comprehensive membership program, which includes video courses, weekly live lessons, ebooks, and lesson plans for teachers. To learn more about our program, just click on the button in the center of your screen or click on the card in the upper right-hand corner. Thank you so much for watching.